First, they strike.
The way that he destroyed that family from within, there's no other word I can find to describe him except evil.
Then they pretend to grieve.
Just phone somebody. Just let us know you're all right.
They appeal for help.
He knew that there was no way that a person can come back from the dead and make a phone call and say, yes, everything's fine.
But hide the truth.
We do not understand why our daughter has been murdered.
I didn't think there was no person on this earth could do that to a child.
Tonight, Crocodile Tears.
Help find whoever shot my husband. Please come forward.
The killers caught in the spotlight. The killers trapped in a web of their own deceit.
How you could possibly move about all day long knowing that that evening you've planned to murder someone.
It was a unique case, and one that would remain a mystery for 8 years. It would finally be solved in an unprecedented sting by one woman's determination and a detective who was prepared to take the biggest gamble of his career.
Cirencester? They got out of a plastic bag down on the water in Cirencester.
A bag? Oh, I bet they've done her fingerprints already.
It's been a long time, actually.
It doesn't matter.
What, in water?
Doesn't matter. If it's her, it's her.
It's not particularly unusual in this day and age for people to go missing. It is unusual for a married woman with 2 young children to go missing.
November 1992, and 30-year-old businesswoman Rhonda Kay was reported missing from her family home in Newbury, Berkshire. She lived there with her husband Nick and their 2 children aged 2 and 6. The couple ran their own baby wear business from home and took in lodgers for extra money. Rhonda seemed to have everything going for her. Her disappearance was totally out of character. Police were baffled.
It just didn't sound right to us that she should suddenly disappear in the morning. Her car was left behind, all her clothes was left behind, the bank accounts and so on hadn't been interfered with.
Police have searched the canal at the back of the Kay's home, as well as the house itself and the surrounding area.
A month into the investigation, and the hunt for Rhonda had failed to unearth any new evidence. There was no body and no new sightings.
She's taken no money from her bank, and even her toothbrush is in place.
All the indications were that Rhonda Kay had either harmed herself or somebody had harmed her.
With the case at a dead end, police called a press conference in the hope of uncovering fresh leads. They asked Rhonda's husband Nick and her sister Rochelle to help with the appeal.
And every now and then the kids ask me where she is, and I just want to be able to tell the kids she's gone away and she's safe and know that it's the truth.
Every night I can come up with another story. I mean, it's so difficult for me to be able to assess what's happened to her or what she's done.
During the police investigation, it emerged that there had been trouble at the family home. 2 days before she went missing, Rhonda had found her husband Nick in bed with her lodger, Karen Scott, and had asked her to leave. It was the second time Rhonda had caught Nick having an affair, and the next day she consulted a solicitor about divorcing him.
The last time I spoke to her was she was waiting for Nick to come home from work, and she said her words to me were that she was going to have it out with him and ask him to leave.
Rochelle was surprised when she called the house the next morning.
He told me that he had gone to bed, and in the morning when he woke up to give her a cup of tea, she was gone.
The separation, she knows the separation is definite, and I know the separation is definite, but I just, for the kids' sake, I just want her to let someone know that she is safe.
He was very obliging and cooperative and prepared to do anything he could to assist. He maintained his version of events that at any moment now it was most likely that Rhonda Kay was going to walk back through the door.
But police were beginning to have their doubts about Nicholas Kay.
Next question.
There was a good deal of suspicion that Rhonda Kay had been killed, and of course Nicholas Kay, owing to the circumstances of her disappearance, Nicholas Kay would have had to been the prime suspect.
Next question.
Kay was in for a surprise. This was going to be a press conference with a sting in the tail. Among the gathered journalists was Roger Sawyer, who worked for a local news agency.
Normally when you go to a news conference like that, you'll have a little briefing with the police beforehand and they'll tell you what the situation is. Sometimes they'll explain to you that the relatives are extremely upset and they'll want you to be quite gentle with them because they're just appealing for information. It was a bit different with this one because we had the informal briefing with the police beforehand. There was none of that. In fact, almost the opposite. I remember asking the officer, is it all right if I ask him if he killed her? And he said, you can ask him what you like.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2 more questions and then it ends. Roger.
I have to ask you the question, Nick. Have you killed your wife?
Rhonda Kay had mysteriously disappeared from her family home in Newbury, Berkshire. The finger of suspicion was pointing at her husband.
Gentlemen, 2 more questions and then it ends.
At a press conference, a journalist was given the go-ahead to ask the question everyone wanted answered.
You killed your wife.
What do you think?
I was a bit surprised by that, but I just asked him then, please answer the question.
No, I have not killed my wife.
I was really pleased that that particular question did come out because it was one of the questions that I wanted to ask myself.
I didn't expect the answer that he gave. I would have liked a much more sincere and concerned answer. I think a lot of people watching that interview would have expected to see some genuine signs of distress on his part.
What do you think?
And his response, to me, answered the question of his guilt. And the anger within me just brewed to such a degree that I just felt that I was going to explode.
I came out of it thereafter feeling much the same as when I went into it. I suspected that she had been murdered, and I felt it was only a matter of time before we found her body.
The appeal may have reinforced people's suspicions, but it brought forward no witnesses or new leads. There was simply nothing for the police to work on. Kay was free to go. He returned home to the house that he had shared with his wife, but now shared with his lover, Karen Scott. In fact, it would emerge that she had returned to the house just 2 days after Rhonda went missing, and that Rhonda's possessions had been sold or burnt.
I understood very clearly that Rhonda was never going to come back.
Kay later married Karen Scott.
It would be we've really had a belly full of all this, to be honest.
With no body and no evidence, the investigation into Rhonda's disappearance went cold. For 7 years, there were no sightings of Rhonda. Rochelle was battling to keep the investigation alive, but despite routine police reviews, the case had come to nothing.
As the years rolled by, I had to resign myself to the fact that there was a possibility that she may never be found.
But things were about to change. Autumn 1999, and Rhonda's case was reviewed by Detective Superintendent Trevor Davis.
When I first reviewed the case, I looked at likely suspects. And of course, who was the person with motive? Nicholas Kay. Who was the person with opportunity? Nicholas Kay. And if you put those together with the circumstances that prevailed at the time, in other words, he'd just been discovered for the second time having an affair in quite a reasonably short period of time, he had to become the major suspect.
He assured me that it would be his last major case before he retired, and that he would do everything in his power to get me the answers that I'd so desperately needed.
There was no forensic evidence that had come to light that was going to implicate Nicholas Kay, and therefore my conclusion was that if we were going to get to the bottom of Rhonda's disappearance, then it had to come from him, and probably him alone.
Davis came up with a groundbreaking plan. The police had recently been given new powers to bug private homes if there was no other way of obtaining evidence. He was given the official go-ahead to mount a covert surveillance operation on Kay's home. Bugs were planted in the kitchen, bedroom and bathroom. It was an extraordinary gamble.
It may well have been within the family that they never ever spoke about it, so it needed a catalyst to bring that to the fore.
That catalyst would be Rochelle. Davis scripted a phone call during which Rochelle would tell Kay that remains had been found. She would give the minimum amount of information in the hope that anything Kay said would incriminate him.
I had to make him believe that it was me speaking normally and convince him that a body had been found. And the pressure of knowing that my words were so important was tremendous.
It was a high-risk strategy. They had to get it right first time. There would be no second chances. Rochelle would make the call to Kay, but not engage in conversation. The police would then monitor the reaction between him and his wife, Karen.
Hello, Nick. It's Rochelle. The police have been down to see me. They found some remains and have taken some DNA samples. I hope they get you this time, you bastard.
What the surveillance team were about to hear was dynamite.
What?
That was Rochelle.
What?
That was Rochelle.
What did she say? Hold on a minute.
Got her out of the plastic bag down on the water in Cirencester.
A bag? Oh, I bet they've done her fingerprints already.
It's been down there a long time.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it'll all be circumstantial though, won't it?
Oh, God.
I can't take this.
Yes, but putting it in a plastic bag looks suspicious. If they look in the bottom of the river, there's pebbles. The first thing you should have discussed it with me. I mean, I don't think you're telling me the truth. I don't think you use gloves.
Why wouldn't I use gloves?
It became apparent to me that I was actually listening to a confession from his own mouth.
You don't know it. They could have found slight forensic evidence in the van. They could have found slight forensic evidence on the walls in the bedroom as well.
No.
Have you heard about that light that picks up?
You know, I mean, I had a hell of a job getting the carpet sorted. You know, that Hoover, that thing, I must have been like on it for over an hour. I must have done all of it.
As the information came out about the likelihood of what had happened to Rhonda, the evidence was getting stronger and stronger.
Bloody Rochelle.
Sorry?
Bloody, bloody, bloody Rochelle.
After 48 hours, police felt that at last they had enough evidence to arrest Kay.
Nicholas Kay said that he knew that the house had been bugged and that he said certain things as a joke meant for the police, who he knew were listening. That was an absolute nonsense. When we looked at the tapes overall, it was more than evident that it was no joke.
Nicholas Kay was charged with the murder of his wife, Rhonda. There was no evidence to implicate his current wife, Karen. In the recorded conversations, there were references to a body in water near Cirencester. Police divers searched local gravel pits, but found nothing. In a 30-square-mile area, the chances of ever finding Rhonda's body are remote. With no body or forensic evidence, for the first time ever, a whole case would depend entirely on taped evidence. Kay continued to maintain his innocence, but the recordings were to seal his fate. However, possibly influenced by the fact that no body had ever been found, the jury returned a surprise verdict of manslaughter, not murder. He was jailed for 6 years.
He could quite easily have gone to the courts like everyone else and got a divorce, and to take somebody's life under these circumstances is absolutely unacceptable, and he couldn't be allowed to take those dark secrets behind closed doors and keep them there.
And every now and then the kids ask me where she is, and I just want to be able to tell the kids she's gone away and she's safe and know that it's the truth.
He knew that there was no way that a person can come back from the dead and make a phone call and say, yes, everything's fine. He just did it for the cameras and to get a sympathy vote.
You killed your wife.
What do you think?
Just answer the question.
No, I have not killed her wife.
There are more than 800 murders a year in Britain, and every year there are dozens of police press appeals. But in the last decade, there have been at least 17 cases of killers crying crocodile tears. Some people, like Vincent Shilton, even staged their own media appeals.
Come home. Or if you don't want to come home, just phone somebody. Just let us know you're all right.
For the watching public, it was an emotional plea for the safe return of his missing girlfriend, 23-year-old Lisa Blunt, the mother of 4 young children. But Shilton was lying. He'd already killed Lisa in a drunken brawl and taken her body to a nearby wood where he'd soaked it in petrol and set it alight.
Just let us know you're right.
But police arrested Shilton and he confessed. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years. Mitchell Quay went one step further and mounted his own media campaign when his wife and the mother of 2 young children disappeared.
One day, either Lindsay's going to walk into a police station or someone's going to see Lindsay.
Quay was the #1 suspect, but publicly protested his innocence, even appearing on This Morning.
Obviously, the question has to be put, and I know what your answer's going to be, but, I mean, did you kill her?
No. No, I just wish someone had listened to me. No one has listened to me since this has begun.
After 15 months, he took his publicity campaign one stage further.
I will not stop until they either apologise to me or I get compensated because I think I deserved it. I've been branded a murderer in this town by them.
But in the end, Quay couldn't keep up the charade. After 36 hours of police questioning, he finally cracked and confessed to Lindsay's murder. He led police to where he'd dumped her dismembered body. He was jailed for life. Many killers think their lies will somehow hoodwink the police and watching public alike. They may believe their tears will save them. They may believe they can ride out the storm. They may even court the limelight, hoping to deflect suspicion from themselves. But in some cases, it's the very appeal they make that leads directly to their downfall.
The children of Robert Wignall, grief-stricken and baffled by the brutal murder of the father they loved.
I can't find any motive whatsoever why anyone would have done this. I've never known my father to raise his hand or even argue with anyone.
Addleston, Surrey, and a romantic walk in the woods ended in murder for 55-year-old Bob Wignall. Bob had gone with his wife Sandra to feed some fox cubs when he was attacked and stabbed several times in the chest. Sandra managed to escape. They'd been married for less than a year.
It's one of those things where everybody says that he's a nice guy, and he genuinely was. He never got upset with the children or his grandchildren. Absolutely idolised his grandchildren.
Bob had been distraught when Rose, his wife of 30 years, had died of cancer. But then he met Sandra, and on Christmas Eve in 1991, they married.
I think everybody was genuinely happy for Bob, that we really thought that he'd found a little bit of happiness again.
Sandra gave police a description of 3 men she said attacked her husband. Senior Investigating Officer Pat Crossan was called to the scene.
So you looked for a motive. Was it robbery? Was it revenge? Was it an argument that had got out of hand? But there was no information leading to any of those. So it just appeared to be a motiveless crime.
It's beyond belief. You can't take it in at all.
I've never known my father to raise his hand or even argue with anyone.
You seem to be on automatic pilot through the whole thing. It's as if you're living somebody else's life. It's not your life anymore.
I would urge anybody that even thinks they might know something to come forward.
Bob's 3 children, Debbie, Denise and Dean, took part in the appeal, but Sandra was too distraught.
Now, you've got to understand that it's a very daunting thing for people to go before the media. They're not trained for it, they're not accustomed to it. And so you cannot make a judgment about why people do or they don't participate.
She was now part of our family, and she'd been through this terrible thing. And we tried to help her deal with her grief as well.
A month into the investigation and with police looking for new leads, a crime appeals program staged a reconstruction of the murder using actors. Sandra agreed for her voice to be used in the appeal.
We were standing talking, and from behind Bob's back, I saw these 3 boys.
Have you seen a puppy boxer, mate? No dogs around here, I'm afraid.
They just seemed to appear from nowhere. I thought one of them was coming after me, but I actually ran to the bottom of the motorway. I didn't know what to do. I was absolutely terrified.
As a result of the appeal, police received dozens of calls, but one in particular stood out. An anonymous caller told detectives they should be looking not for 3 men, but 2. He made another startling claim.
He was very, very persistent in saying that it was Sandra Wignall was the key to solving this crime. He made a significant comment to me that she was an evil woman, and that if I had her followed, she would take me to the address where these men could be found.
Bob Wignall had been stabbed to death while on a woodland walk with his wife, Sandra. The man investigating the murder, then Detective Superintendent Pat Crossan, had been suspicious of Bob's wife, Sandra, from day one.
Robert Wignall was murdered near the spot where I'm now standing, and his body was dumped about 10 feet behind me. There were certain inconsistencies coming through. First of all, how did she find the body 10 or 15 minutes later in a dark wood, some distance away from where the attack had taken place? Why, for example, did she not run off in the opposite direction, where there were lights from houses, to seek help?
The police mounted a surveillance operation to follow Sandra Wignall. Sandra's secret world was about to unravel. Police discovered that just 9 days after marrying Bob, she was back with a former lover, Terry Bewley.
The relationship with that man was such that she would do anything that that man had asked her to do. If he said to drive naked to a given spot, she would do it. He invited other men to have sexual relationships with her in his presence, and she agreed to that. She obtained money, legitimately I might add, and gave it to him. She was totally besotted by him.
The police investigated Bewley's background and uncovered some alarming details.
Terry Bewley was a cold, cunning and calculated individual who had a previous conviction for murder.
Police were convinced that Bewley was involved in the murder. They also discovered that 3 months after marrying Bob, Sandra Wignall had persuaded him to take out a life insurance policy for £21,000. But Bob had begun to suspect his wife was having an affair. He confronted her about it just a week before he was murdered. Police followed Sandra Wignall to Bewley's house 50 miles away, where they arrested the pair and another man, Bewley's lodger, Martin Hughes. When questioned, Hughes admitted being the anonymous caller. He had recognized Sandra Wignall's voice on the appeals program. She was a regular visitor at Bewley's house.
When Bob and I actually got together, he was such a different person. He, you know, reverted back to his old self, and everybody was thrilled to bits.
Hughes was also able to give police the identity of a second man who he said attacked Bob. Harold Moult. Police arrested Moult, who made a full confession.
He told us about how he and Bewley had disposed of clothing, and in fact where he, Moult, had disposed of a knife in a canal in Birmingham.
Bewley and Wignall continued to deny any involvement in the murder, but Moult's confession had given police the proof they needed. The pair were charged. Bob's family was shocked, but had begun to have their doubts about Sandra's story.
There were times when you thought, you know, she must know more than she's letting on.
You feel quite bad upon yourself for thinking them.
Sanity, what you think is sanity, kicks in, and you think, well, that's just ridiculous to believe that she would have done this. Why would she have done such a terrible thing?
She actually sat in my kitchen discussing how she was going to spend the money, how she'd promised her daughter a horse. I suppose you're in shock yourself, and you don't want to believe, you desperately don't want to believe that she could possibly be involved.
Sandra Wignall had not wanted to take part in the police press appeals. She feared showing her face would help people link her to Bewley. She only reluctantly agreed to use her voice, but even that was enough to trap her.
The motives for this murder, said the prosecution, were lust and greed. Sandra Wignall claimed her husband had been attacked by 3 youths for no apparent reason. The story was, said the prosecution, complete fiction.
This woman was portrayed in the press after she was tried as almost, virtually a prostitute. And we had absolutely no knowledge.
Sandra lived a totally double life. We just weren't describing the person we know. It still seems unbelievable.
In November 1993, Terry Bewley, Harold Moult and Sandra Wignall were jailed for life.
In a dramatic sense, he had signed his own death warrant when he married Sandra Wignall. She lured him into that wood with the sole purpose of somebody killing her husband.
When Bob and I actually got together, he was such a different person. He, you know, reverted back to his old self, and everybody was thrilled to bits that he'd met me, and everybody was very thrilled when we got married.
It's incredibly difficult to understand how you could possibly move about all day long knowing that that evening you've planned to murder someone.
Jean Dado faced the cameras after her husband had been shot in an apparently motiveless murder.
I would just like to say, anybody out there knows anything or has seen anything that could help find whoever shot my husband, would please come forward.
52-year-old financial advisor Terry Dado was shot at point-blank range as he opened the front door of their home.
And I deserve the pain.
Dado's apparently heartfelt appeal was a sham. With the help of Roger, her son from a previous marriage, she had made an incredible 11 attempts on her husband's life before finally succeeding with a hitman. With her marriage in trouble, she had not wanted to share the nest egg she and her husband had built up. Dado and her son were sentenced to 18 years for conspiracy to murder. The hitman was jailed for life. 10 years on, Dado still maintains her innocence. A personal appeal from victims' family or friends can maximize publicity, but it's a daunting experience, and people react in different ways, whether guilty or innocent. West Yorkshire, and a quiet rural town was rocked by the sudden disappearance of 23-year-old Linda Fleming, a trainee pharmacist. Linda, who lived with her parents, had failed to turn up for work. After 24 hours and with no news of her whereabouts, her father reported her missing.
She loved her family, she was devoted to her family, and seemed to be much closer to Dad than to Mum. She was Daddy's girl. She loved her boyfriend Stuart. They were going to get engaged.
6 days later, and with still no clues to go on, Linda's boyfriend Stuart, Father Derek, and brother Stuart appealed for information.
Was she depressed for any other reason?
No. Linda was not depressed. And I do not want anybody to even think that Linda was depressed.
For the gathered journalists, it seemed an all-too-familiar routine. Many were fearing the worst.
The press conference took place at a time when there'd been quite a few briefings where members of murder victims' families had given conferences and had turned out to be the killers. So we were looking at all three of them and wondering which one of them might be the murderer.
Linda, wherever you are, or for whatever reason, please come home or just ring. We all love you and we want you home with us.
None of us suspected Derek for 1 second, and we certainly didn't suspect his son Stuart. So we were all looking at Linda's boyfriend thinking, was it him?
She was down at my house, and Mum and Dad knew she was there. She was staying over. She would even ring to tell them she was staying over, even though they knew she was there.
Whereas Derek had been crying and was shaking and was visibly upset and obviously devastated, Stuart was very straight, very calm. There were no tears.
The appeal was disappointing. It brought no new leads or sightings of Linda. Police stepped up the search.
So far, an extensive search by mounted police, tracker dogs and the helicopter has found no trace of Linda.
The police were far more concerned than they would normally be for your commoner garden missing from home. I think everyone believed right from the beginning that something more sinister was afoot with this case.
3 days later, their worst fears were confirmed when the body of a young woman was found on the moors 5 miles away. It was identified as Linda's. The pathologist reported that she had died as a result of multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt instrument.
The call for further help from the public remains, with the belief that it may now take just one piece of evidence to trap Linda's killer.
There had been no sexual assault or robbery, and with no obvious motive, police began to suspect that Linda had been killed by someone close to her.
People started to look around and say, well, who on earth could that be?
The spotlight fell on the last people known to have seen Linda alive, her family and her boyfriend. The community was stunned. Forensic scientists were sent into their homes. The search at Linda's boyfriend's house produced no evidence. He was in the clear. But during the search of the Fleming family home, there was a shocking discovery: microscopic specks of blood.
There was, I recall, blood staining between the tiles on some of the grouting. There was a small amount of staining within a cupboard in the utility room, and there was a stain on a peg bag which was subjected to DNA analysis.
At lunchtime today, detectives announced that a 51-year-old local man had been arrested in connection with Linda Fleming's murder.
Linda's brother was in the clear because of an alibi. Police arrested her father, Derek.
I confess, we were all pretty staggered by that, because you just don't hear about fathers murdering their grown-up daughters.
Then came a second breakthrough. A search of Fleming's car produced more traces of blood. There was also blood under the laces of his shoes. He was now the prime suspect in his daughter's murder. The net was closing in. Fleming's account of his whereabouts on the day Linda disappeared didn't add up.
He said that he'd returned home at around about 8:15. They confronted him with the fact that his wife and their neighbour had said that he'd returned at about 10 and that they were there. And so it was that Fleming then changed his account and said, oh, well, I must have returned home twice.
Police questioned Fleming for nearly 3 days. He continued to deny any involvement in the murder. Without more evidence, they would have to release him in less than 3 hours. Then came the results. The blood was Linda's. Police presented Fleming with the damning evidence.
And then and only then did Fleming ever admit that Linda had been there and that she had died there.
Fleming claimed that Linda had died when he pushed her during a violent argument. He said he'd hit her with a hammer and disposed of her body to make it look like she'd been attacked by a stranger. This contradicted the pathologist's report, which stated that Linda had received at least 9 blows to the head while she was alive. Fleming would change his story several times.
Suddenly the picture that we had of Derek Fleming being this pillar of respectability, being this family man, was shattered. It turned out this happy, married family man had been carrying on an affair for 16 years with a former work colleague.
It was speculated that Linda had found out about her father's affair and was about to reveal all.
Derek Fleming turned out to be a control freak who ruled his family with an iron fist, if you like. It's a cliche, but it's true. He was an absolute tyrant in the home.
Derek Fleming was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Linda, wherever you are, or for whatever reason, please come home or just ring. We all love you.
It emerged that Fleming had been reluctant to take part in the police press appeal, an appeal that was later to be dramatically turned against him. In an unusual step, his apparently grief-stricken plea was played to the judge and jury during his trial.
He practiced a cruel and arrogant deception on his family at a time when they must have been aging with anxiety over Linda's fate. But this was, first and foremost, a lie. This press conference showed, we suggested, just how controlled he could be, because that quivering of the lip, that crocodile tear, was wholly bogus. It was the act of a man who was trying to save his own skin.
Linda, wherever you are, or for whatever reason, please come home or just ring. We all love you and we want you home with us.
Not everyone breaks down in front of the cameras. Sean Jenkins, flanked by his wife, was the model of calm control as he appealed for help after his foster daughter, Billie Jo, was found murdered.
As a family, we are totally devastated. We do not understand why our daughter has been murdered or what the motive could possibly be.
13-year-old Billy Jo had been bludgeoned to death as she painted the patio doors of the family home in East Sussex.
We appeal to anyone who thinks they have any information about this crime to contact the police urgently. Now that we have attended this press conference today, I would ask the media to respect my family's privacy.
Jenkins claimed there had been a prowler, but he was convicted on forensic evidence and sentenced to life. Like many killers, he thought he could escape justice by manipulating the media and police. It was Manchester's biggest police investigation since the Moors murders.
It's a very, very sensitive thing to a lot of people in the Northwest, you know, children going missing.
May Bank Holiday weekend, schoolboy Jamie Lavis goes missing.
How can an 8-year-old child, and bear in mind he was only just 8 years of age, how long can he survive out on his own, unsupported?
Openshaw, a run-down suburb of Manchester. This was Jamie's home and playground. On Monday the 5th of May, he went out to play, but didn't come back.
We was looking for him. Up until tea time, we thought he was just messing about, playing hide and seek or whatever. And then when it got late, about 8 o'clock, it was really starting to worry people. My mum, she was shaking. When my dad came home, she just broke down. She says, we need to find him, it's getting late, it's getting dark. And then it got to 10 o'clock, we had to phone the police.
The police called a press conference and asked Jamie's mother, Karen, to help with the appeal.
If anybody out there knows where Jamie is or is giving him food, please just get in touch with the police. Everybody's waiting for him to come home.
Now, Jamie's described as being small for his age. He's about 4 foot tall, and he wears clothes that are made to fit a 5 to 6-year-old.
A crucial witness came forward, Darren Vickers. He approached Jamie's sister, Jane.
And he said to Jane, he wouldn't happen to be wearing a dark blue Reebok tracksuit, would he? So Jane said yes. And he said, oh, he was on my bus.
Bus driver Darren Vickers lived round the corner from the Lavis family, and he quickly joined in the search for Jamie.
He was like a best friend. Anything that we wanted doing, he'd be there, offering his help, no matter what it was, not the time of day, night, he'd be there.
We just got close. It's like one big close family now because we've been out basically 24 hours a day, all of us involved looking for Jamie.
And remember, if you're desperate like the Lavis family were, they've lost a child, they'll hang on to anything or anyone in order to assist to find that child.
Over the following weeks, there were hundreds of reported sightings of Jamie, but they all came to nothing. The last known person to see him alive was still bus driver Darren Vickers.
Terrible. Could never dream of it. A young child on the bus like that, you know, just going missing. It's just unbearable to think about. It's just a nightmare for everyone.
According to Darren Vickers, Jamie had been just another passenger on the bus. But when police tracked down other witnesses who'd been on the 219 that day, they gave a very different story.
He made that bus like a playground. To be allowed to change gear while the bus is moving, to give out tickets, to press the ticket machine, to sort the change out, to stand in the actual driver's cabin next to the driver. All these things, if you are a young boy, are very, very attractive.
In fact, Jamie had spent over 6 hours on the bus that day. According to Darren Vickers, Jamie had an all-day saver ticket, so he'd allowed him to stay on.
It's like any child that has a day saver ticket which you're boarded with. It's up to them what they do with it. They paid for the ticket. They can do really what they please with it.
They don't issue those sorts of tickets to children, and in fact, Jamie never had a day saver ticket. He was just allowed to remain on the bus.
Police were beginning to have serious concerns about the man who was now in the heart of the Lavis family, and even doing television appeals on their behalf.
There's somebody out there who's got to be sick for keeping a child of that age. You know, it shouldn't be done. If you had any respect, you just hand him over to the nearest police station. Just let the child go in. Just let him come home. He's not in trouble. He's not nothing. He's just wanted.
He wanted to do more appeals than what we was willing to do because we didn't want to be constantly in the public eye.
The more that he put himself up in front of the media, which he did regularly, as though he was the hero, trying to find this child, trying to organise all the searches and having the family depend on him all the time. This would assist him to keep one step ahead of the inquiry.
But then a crucial piece of evidence came to light. After going through hours of CCTV footage, the police came across images of Jamie captured at the bus station on the day he disappeared. Darren Vickers was also caught on camera, following Jamie and even ruffling his hair. This contradicted Vickers' story.
It wasn't just a driver with a passenger. The driver had actually left the bus to speak to the child. So again, it's another little piece of information, a piece of intelligence to work on.
The police became even more suspicious when they checked out Vickers' job references.
We found that he'd given false information on his references, and one of his referees was a convicted paedophile.
The Lavis family were about to discover that their newfound friend had become the prime suspect in their son's murder.
On Piccadilly, 11:52.
Darren Vickers joins us on the phone now. Darren, you're the bus driver that was the last person to see little Jamie alive. How come he hasn't been seen since?
I'll never know till the day comes home. I still believe he's alive. If the case was what the police are making out to be, if the case was he was dead, around where they're looking, they'd have found him by now.
Vickers even phoned a late-night radio chat show to volunteer information and was publicly describing himself as part of the family.
So how's the police investigation going?
The police are not letting much information out about that, which the family is supposed to know. You know, the first confirmed sightseeing.
Yeah.
We've never been told.
You always suspected that there was something underneath that he wasn't telling anybody, and I think that's why none of us believed a word he said when he appeared on the show.
3 weeks after Jamie was reported missing, police arrested Darren Vickers for his abduction. They then had to break the news to his family.
We didn't take it seriously at all. We just thought they'd drawn a blank, so they was just aiming for the nearest person.
In fact, they vilified the police and the action that we'd taken at that particular time. Understandably so, because we had taken away their pillar of strength.
And we actually went down to the police station and sat there while he got out.
It's my understanding when Vickers was released, they held a party.
Police had to release Vickers because of a lack of evidence. He then turned to the media again to publicly proclaim his innocence. He even invited a film crew round to the Lavis' house.
If I would have never come forward in the first place, you know, just to let them know that I'd seen Jamie on that day, they'd never been nothing the wiser today. They'd have been ripping their head, pulling at straws, you know. You know, I thought I did the right decent thing in letting them know that I'd seen him on the day, but I'd never thought I'd have been, you know, arrested on suspicion of his abduction. I think it's just a joke.
Every time you turned on the television, Vickers would be there.
I feel he's still alive. I don't fear the same way the police fear that he's murdered. His family don't. You know, but somebody somewhere knows where Jamie is.
And he was doing this for no other reason than to throw suspicion away from him.
I've got nothing to do with the abduction of James Lavis. And I've got the backing of the Lavis family, relations, everybody.
By saying he got the backing of the Lavis family, by telling the members of the public via the media that why are the police picking on me, because I am the man leading the searches, I am the pillar of strength behind this family. So how can it be me?
Vickers even moved in with the family after police searched his own house 3 streets away.
Vickers' presence amongst the family made our job very, very difficult. We have a duty to inform the family and keep them up to date with the results of our inquiries. When you've got an enemy within that family and you know about that, you can't be as open as you would like to be with that family.
But Vickers' frequent media appeals were about to backfire. 2 teenagers who had seen him on television reported that he had tried to lead them into some woods late at night. The police then focused their search for Jamie in that area.
This is the area where we found the tarpaulin, which covered clothing similar to the one that had been described by Jamie's mother. And it consisted of a pair of jogging trousers, children's jogging trousers, and a wax jacket, child's wax jacket. We scooped it up, put it into a bag, took it back to the police station, and then, when they laid it out to dry, we found a jawbone. Our Home Office pathologist examined it and told us that, number one, yes, it was human. Number two, the size of it indicated it being a child's around the age of the child we were looking for. That's Jamie.
DNA tests proved that it had been Jamie's. His body had been dismembered and the remains scattered. Police were able to break down Vickers' alibi by showing that he had not been with his family that night, as he had claimed.
Police officer said, we've found the remains, we've had it tested, and it's Jamie. And I said, no, it's not. I said, no, it's not Jamie, and I wouldn't believe it for months. I wouldn't accept it that it was Jamie. In fact, because of the fact of the state that they found it in, I didn't think there was no person on this earth could do that to a child. Because we didn't find all of what was of Jamie. We didn't find all his clothes and we didn't find all his body.
Vickers denied abducting and murdering Jamie, but his betrayal and manipulation of the family wasn't over. During the trial, he tried to pin the blame on Jamie's father.
My dad was in total shock. He just couldn't believe that someone was trying to say that he killed his own flesh and blood. If my dad was anything, he worshipped his kids.
But Vickers didn't stop there. He also claimed that he'd been having an affair with Karen and that she was carrying his child.
And he wanted blood tests to prove it was his child. So I did blood tests, just to satisfy him, because I couldn't stand his eyes going in the back of my head every time I went to the trial. Just to prove to everybody, because people was whispering behind us backs, writing graffiti on walls that I'd slept with my son's murderer.
He's a control freak. He likes the feeling of control. He was controlling the family, he was controlling the media, and he was trying to control our inquiries. Right up to the end.
For 5 months, Vickers had wept crocodile tears with the family, falsely raising their hopes while trying to save his own skin.
I've got nothing to do with the abduction of James Lavis.
In April 1999, he was sentenced to life. 24 hours later, he confessed to sexually abusing and murdering Jamie.
What he did to Jamie, what he did to that family, the way that he destroyed that family from within, there's no other word I can find to describe him except evil.
I go up to that cemetery and I think, I'm buying him flowers for Christmas when I should be buying him toys. And I'll never forgive Darren Vickers for what he's done. To kill a child, but to dismember him and bury him is the most sickening thing that anybody could ever do to somebody.